In continuing to look at just how divided the United States has become, we can now turn to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. These are the debates between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln for the Senate race of Illinois in 1858. Stephen Douglas was running as a Democrat and Abraham Lincoln running as a Republican. You see Stephen Douglas on the top left and Abraham Lincoln on the bottom right. The biggest issue in their debates was the issue over slavery. However, not that either gentleman wanted slavery. In fact, neither of them wanted it. But the question was, how are they going to keep from doing this? Now, these two men had a series of 7 open air debates, meaning they came together and they debated one another 7 different times. And in one of these debates, Stephen Douglas is going to issue something called the Freeport Doctrine. What this said is that slavery is going to need certain laws in order to exist. So if you don't pass those laws, then there would be no slavery. Essentially, what he was saying to do was that the people of a certain region could just go around the laws of slavery. So even though now, after Dred Scott, that slaves were able to be taken anywhere in the United States, if people didn't want that, they just didn't need to pass those laws in that region to support slavery. So that was really a unique concept and really made him stand out in those debates. What ends up happening here is that Stephen Douglas is going to win that election and becomes the senator of Illinois. But this is going to give Abraham Lincoln that national fame and put him on the national spotlight to then go on and run for president in 2 more years as a Republican. John Brown is going to be an extreme abolitionist. You see him depicted here in this painting. He was one that stood in the back of a church at one point, raised his hand, and said he believed he had been called by God to bring about an end to slavery. You can also tell from the depiction in this painting that he did not mind violence. He really believed that was willing to do anything it took to end slavery. He's going to lead a militia, a group of his followers, to lead a raid on Harper's Ferry, which was going to be the arsenal there that held all the weapons, and Harper's Ferry, Virginia, trying to arm slaves and then go on to start a slave rebellion. That was his goal in raiding Harper's Ferry. So what ends up happening though is this was a complete failure. He ends up being surrounded by Robert E. Lee and the Virginia military. He is forced to surrender. One of his own sons are going to be killed in this. There was no large group of slaves who showed up to start this slave rebellion. And what ends up happening is he is put on trial and then found guilty for trying to start a servile insurrection. What that means is basically a slave rebellion. He is later hanged and becomes a martyr. Remember, a martyr is someone who dies for their cause. And becomes a martyr for lots of abolitionists, people who believed in the cause. Now, not everybody obviously agreed with John Brown's methods. Not everybody was okay with all the violence that he did. This was not his only period of violence. He was really known. He went into a small town and is going to kill some pro-slavery advocates. He basically hacks them to death with a big knife. So this is not his only instance of violence. But not everybody agreed with this. But what comes out of this, though, is that many Southerners thought that John Brown represented all Northerners and that all Northerners wanted to basically kill them and take them out for their beliefs in slavery. And then, once again, felt like their whole way of life was being attacked by the Northerners. In the 1860 election, voters had 4 different choices. And again, the biggest issue here was the issue of slavery and how each of these candidates went about the issue of slavery. Lincoln, again, stuck to that Republican Party policy and said that he was simply going to stop the spread of slavery, but he wasn't going to interfere with slavery where it already existed. Stephen Douglas is going to get the support of Northern Democrats. John Breckinridge gets the Southern Democrats, and John Bell is going to be part of that Constitutional Union Party. So if you look at this electoral college map here, you see how those votes were split. Now, Abraham Lincoln is going to win this election, but he wins it without a single electoral vote from the South. Now, why that matters is, guys, in the South, in some of those southern states, If you had gone to vote and wanted to vote for Abraham Lincoln, you couldn't have, because in a lot of those places, they did not even put his name on the ballot. So the fact that he won without a single Southern electoral vote proved to the South that they would have no voice in their government with Abraham Lincoln as the president. This is going to lead to them to begin to secede from the Union. South Carolina begins the secession, being the very first one, and then 6 others follow. In fact, the Confederate States of America were formed before Abraham Lincoln ever even took office. So this was going to really highlight the fact that how very unhappy the South was. Remember, Lincoln is going to be elected in November but doesn't become president until March. So there is quite a bit of time between November and March for all of this to take place. In fact, they even have enough time, the Confederate States even have enough time to elect a new president, Jefferson Davis, who you see pictured here on the left. So this is all going to happen once Lincoln is elected in 1860. So while there are lots and lots of causes leading up to the Civil War, the one that is the most direct, that really kind of pushes the South over the edge, was the fact that Lincoln was elected without any Southern electoral votes.